Today we're going to talk about finding domain and range visually. Let's start off with this first graph on the left, and we're going to talk about domain first. Domain is all possible x values of a function. To determine the domain, we look for the leftmost and rightmost x values on the graph. So let's start off with the leftmost. The leftmost is going to be -5, but it never actually reaches -5. So we're going to have -5 less than x. It's not going to be equal to. Our rightmost is going to be 4, and it does equal 4, so we're going to have x is less than or equal to 4. Let's write this in interval notation. We're going to have a parentheses, -5, because we do not include 5, comma, 4, bracket, because we include the 4. So let's look at the range. The range is all possible y values. And to determine the range, we look for the lowermost and uppermost y values on the graph. So the lowermost y value is going to be -2, and it's still not inclusive, so we have -2 less than y. And our uppermost is going to be 3, so it's going to be less than or equal to 3. And write this in our interval notation. We're going to have parentheses, -2 because it's not inclusive, comma, 3, bracket, because it is inclusive. So let's look at the second graph on the right. Let's talk about domain first. What is our leftmost x value? It's going to be -4. So we're going to have -4 is less than or equal to x because it is included. And what is our rightmost? So we have two arrows, so these continues on and on and on to infinity. So we're going to have x is less than infinity. Write this in our interval notation. We're going to have bracket -4 because it's inclusive, comma, infinity, parentheses because we never include infinity. Let's look at the range real fast for this one. And what is the lowermost y value? So we have this arrow, so it just keeps going on and on and on until -infinity, which is less than y. And what about our uppermost y value? Well, we have this arrow again, so it's going to be infinity, so less than infinity. So our interval notation for this one is going to be parentheses, -infinity, comma, infinity, parentheses. The range is all real numbers. So let's move on to 2 more graphs. Okay, so we have 2 more graphs here. Now let's look at this first one on the left. We're going to look at the domain. So what is the leftmost x value? Well, we have this arrow again, so it's going to keep going and going until -infinity. It's less than x. And what is the rightmost x value? Again, we have an arrow, so it's going to be less than infinity. So in interval notation, it's going to be parentheses, -infinity, comma, infinity, parentheses, because we never include infinities. Now let's look at the range, and that's all the y values. So what's the lowermost y value? Well, we have these arrows. So it keeps going on and on until -infinity, less than y. And then what's our uppermost y value? Well, it goes up to this 4. So we're going to have less than or equal to 4 because it is inclusive. There is no hole. So writing this in interval notation, we're going to have parentheses, -infinity. We don't include infinity, comma, 4, bracket, because we do include 4. Now let's look at the domain and range of the second graph over here. The domain is all the x values. So what is the leftmost and rightmost x values? The leftmost is we got an arrow, so it's going to be -infinity, comma. And the rightmost is going to be an arrow as well, so it's going to be infinity. So it's -infinity, comma, infinity. The range on this one, let's look at the lowermost, which we have an arrow again, so -infinity. And then the uppermost, which we have an arrow again, which is going to be infinity. And that is how to find domain and range visually. We need to focus on the uppermost and lowermost for the range, the leftmost and rightmost for the domain.